I'm Susan, and on behalf of myself and Flavia, who you might have met on your way in, and Central Institute of Technology, who are our sponsors, I'd like to welcome you to your green drinks. Tonight we have 3 speakers who are going to talk about the Perth Waterfront Development Project. One of them is Ralph Stanton. He's an inaugural member of City Vision, which has been formulating alternatives for Perth foreshore. We also have Sue Graham-Taylor, who works as a historian and researcher, and has been researching the history of the Swan River. We also have Mike Bamford, who's a consultant specializing in fauna investigations for environmental impact assessment. And I'll tell you a little bit more about each speaker in turn as they go ahead and give us their presentations. So just to remind you, if you could please put your phones on silent if you haven't already. If you haven't already found the loos, they're outside, just to the left. We're going to run for about an hour. And in the hour, each speaker is going to share with us their knowledge for 10 minutes. At 8 minutes, just so they know, I'm going to make this sound. So they know they've got about 2 minutes to wrap up, and I'll make it again twice at 10 minutes. And that's just about done. Also, at the end, we'll have our more informal part of the evening, which is outside. We'll have some drinks and some nibbles, so please stick around for that and we'll continue the conversation. Lastly, I just wanted to ask everyone if we could please keep this as a very respectful and mature conversation. I know that there may be people here who have different points of view and opinions, and that's wonderful, and please share them. But let's just do that in a very genuine, respectful way. And also, let's be concise, because we're going to have about half an hour for discussion, so that way we can get as many people involved as possible. All right, with that, I will introduce the first speaker, Ralph Stanton. Oops. Ralph is a qualified architect and town planner. He's responsible in the past for large-scale urban development schemes and Perth Regional Town Centre plans. Ralph is an inaugural member of City Vision, which is a voluntary, non-partisan advocacy group that has been formulating alternatives for Perth's foreshore since 1988, so quite a while. Ralph is engaged in many of City Vision's projects, especially ideas for Perth Waterfront. Today, he is also an exhibiting visual artist. So welcome, Ralph.
I should say that I'm not here as an advocate of the current schemes. I'm not here as an advocate of the current government scheme because City Vision's been around for a long time and started the idea of doing something on the foreshore way back in 1988. You may not like that, but one of the things that we were involved in was the idea that the foreshore may have some development, not potential for commercial development, but for public use and for civic uses of one sort or another. That was in 1988, that led in 1991 to an international competition run by the Perth City Council. And you can see there that this idea of, this is one of the entries, only one of many. The idea of building out into the water from the central city started to take effect way back over 20 years ago. We started to think, well, you've got to be careful what you wish for because something's happened which you may not always care about. Now this was the City Council itself then went into some looking at the different ideas. This was when the advent of the railway, of the Mandurah Railway went through the city, and Perth City Council started to look at all sorts of different development ideas for the foreshore. Some of which, this was only one of several, of many. But you could see that they kept the Esplanade Park and the Riverside Drive intact. That led later on to the state government taking an interest and began to address the issue. They then developed this sort of guideline plan, indicative concept plan under Land Corp, and they also kept the Esplanade more or less intact and started building out here as well, in front of the convention centre. That in turn led to, in 2007, what they called a peer group. Various architects and planners were brought together to develop a sort of guideline scheme again, and that also kept the Esplanade, but started to build out along here and had no development out here. And then the government engaged consultants who completely ignored all of that, came up with this plan, which you may remember a few years ago, the sort of Dubai on Swan. And there's the Swan.
Oh.
And they literally dug up the Esplanade. Now, we, at City Vision, were all the time sort of trying to develop some ideas and some sort of principles, and we thought that some of the principles that should be followed would be to do with respecting the Kings Park view and the landscape and the Mounts Bay and the Esplanade Park and the foreshore, and also recognising to get strong southerly winds coming right into that inlet, and also here's the wind rose. It shows you this is the wind rose from that area. The overshadowing, tall buildings are going to overshadow because the sun still rises in the east and goes around to the north and sets in the west, and you can't avoid shadows from tall buildings. And so you should be setting the buildings back under a line which represents the winter lowest sun in the winter, and so there won't overshadow anything there. And City Vision came up with a plan, which you may or may not like. That attracted the attention. Of the new government, and we were asked to come and talk to Mr. Barnett and Mr. Day about our ideas. And we had continued with the idea of not closing Riverside Drive and of retaining a fair proportion of the Esplanade Park, not building over here. And if you're going to do this, do it with a little bit of care. But they again came up, they used the same architects who came up with a new version of the plan we showed before, but instead of circular buildings, they're now square. And they now look like this. And this was published in the paper not long ago, a couple of weeks ago. And it shows you those tall buildings that they're building without any shadows. They're sort of ghostly buildings, which, and this looks like sort of Miami on Swan now. We've moved from Dubai to Miami. And yeah, so we've got some really, that's the site over here. Now the big issue I've been asked to talk about tonight particularly is the question of access, traffic and access. Now that's the Northbridge Link, that's the East Perth extension, gateway thing, and this is here, the scheme we're looking at now on the waterfront. Now there's 150,000 square metres of new office space going into those big buildings, and so many thousand people will come in, and the traffic and public transport system will be under enormous stress with all those new developments there. Now, the government does have schemes for improving public transport, and but at the same time they're going to be cutting Riverside Drive, and the public transport will be under enormous stress. So that's an issue. Now we can see here these tall buildings, these are schematic buildings that the government architects, planners and architects have put up. They're big decks of car parking under here, And these big buildings here, they cut the road across there, and you'll have to drive around that way to get around. And those yellow blocks are development blocks. And there's the new inlet. Now, in terms of traffic and movement, the whole of the city must be seen to sort of in a way as an organic, like an organism. It moves, and people have to move across it, whether by public or private transport. This is a key link across from east to west, and also from north and across to northwest to southeast, and people coming in this way and going that way, right across. And Riverside Drive itself has no real alternative. What will happen if it's cut will be the forcing, if you like, of traffic both into the CBD and around its periphery. So instead of improving traffic flow, we'll have more and more land use, more and more development on the waterfront site there, and attracting more people to that location. And we're actually slowing down and diminishing your access. Just as an idea, this is just looking at, say, morning peak movements from east to west, from east to west. And Riverside Drive allows people to come down off the freeway and up into this part of East Perth, of the east end of the CBD, or along this way and up into West Perth and what have you. And if you cut it, you're going to have them wending their way through Vic Park and into the new tunnel, which is going to be widened, but you've still got to get out of the exits, which are clogged, and into West Perth and so on, or into the already narrowed streets of the central area. And you could use these little diagrams and look at all different aspects of east and west traffic, north and south traffic. It's just going to be a quagmire. Just another little view, that's from Kings Park. That's what it's going to look like with the new buildings one day, like that. Now this was done by some people working for the City Gatekeepers group, just showing what the volume of those buildings. We don't need big buildings in order to get an attractive waterfront, exciting place to sit and coffee and what have you. These are an alternative plan produced by the City Gatekeepers, and I advise you, if you're interested in this issue, to look at the City Gatekeepers site. It's called citygatekeepers.com.au. They've got a whole lot of issues like this. This is a new plan produced by City Vision. It shows you a much softer development with still keeping a fair whack of the Esplanade, some of the heritage buildings, much lower and less dense buildings, and many more public buildings. You know, we're giving up a lot of public land here. Why don't we have civic developments? And whatever these may represent, a new museum, a new lyric theatre, all sorts of uses of that sort, which in a way have a call on public space, which private and commercial development doesn't have. There we are, I've come to the end. Good timing. And here's just a view, a three-dimensional view showing perhaps a hotel and the sort of, except some buildings stepped back, and public use here maybe of one sort or another. But that's my talk.